Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the ACE Report. I'm your host, Nick Lawrence, and I'm here tonight with Dr. Lou Cuthbert and Donna Cuthbert from ACE, the Alliance for a Clean Environment. We have so many things to talk about, an exciting show planned for you tonight, lots of information. Later on, we'll have some special guests with us, and I want to just let you know that we're going to be talking about, we're going to title this Limerick Nuclear Plant's Unprecedented Use and Abuse of Public Water with some special guests that we have coming up later on. We'll introduce them as we put them on the show tonight. But Lou, we have a lot of things to talk about. Let's talk about the overview. What kinds of things do you want our audience to pay attention to tonight?
Well, there are a couple of things that are just extraordinarily important, Nick. Most people in this community are not aware of the fact that we are about to have a public hearing, August 28th, largely about water and the Limerick nuclear power plant. And that hearing, after an 8-year wait, has been scheduled. It is a joint hearing of the Department of Environmental Protection, PADEP, and the Delaware River Basin Commission, DRBC. Those are agencies we've talked about in some earlier programming. But the Mercury announced this as soon as it was public information that there will be a hearing, and it's about more water for the nuclear plant. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going to happen, where it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. The hearing is set for Tuesday, August 28th. From 6 to 9 p.m. at Sunnybrook Ballroom. So what we hope will happen throughout this hour is people will get lots of information about what's wrong here. You know, if you hear me say there's something really wrong with this picture several times during this program, it's by design and intent. There's something really wrong with this picture, Nick. The Department of Environmental Protection and the DRBC, in our analysis, have just gone to extraordinary lengths to give Exelon whatever they want to run this nuclear power plant. The focus of this hearing is water, and I think the message is unmistakable. They just want more from every available source. We'll go through some of the specifics, but we've spent a lot of time, Donna has spent the lion's share of the time pouring through hundreds, thousands of pages of documents and drafts and dockets to figure out what's going on here, what's at stake. Well, there's a lot at stake. The DEP basically is about to issue a permit here unless there's a tremendous public outcry that would basically just allow them to do what they want, continue at will, in essence, in terms of discharges into the water. So we're talking radiation, we're talking cooling water toxics we've discussed in some previous programs. There's going to be a fair amount of discussions about what the radiation and toxics mean in the form of total dissolved solids. That's a term that most people are not familiar with. But I think one of the worst things, at least in our analysis, is DEP basically has decided they're just going to exempt Exelon from monitoring in any meaningful way or complying with discharges because they can't meet the law. That's our conclusion. People are welcome to take a look at the data and the docket information, the permits themselves, just to verify. The second half of this thing, which is unprecedented. I call this a tandem hearing, and I believe it's intended to just overpower and overwhelm this entire community. In the 15 years I've been doing this kind of work, I have never seen two simultaneous permits put out at the same time for a hearing. The second one is the DRBC, Delaware River Basin Commission. They basically control the water. And what's most alarming with what they're proposing to do is, they're basically about to remove and relinquish basically any controls in terms of access to water. All different sources, the Schuylkill River, the Delaware River via the Perkiomen. We've talked in previous programs about the Tamaqua reservoirs. We've talked about the Wadesville mine pool water. Basically, they're about to give Exelon and the Limerick nuclear power plant more water from every source. We think that's a really bad idea, by the way. So that would, in essence, dedicate the Schuylkill River to this plant. Now, that has a whole lot of implications, which we'll talk about throughout this program. But if the power plant has access to and can grab, if you will, as much water as it wants during any sort of an emergency, which they would define and declare, by the way, which is not in the public interest, according to a lot of experts, then what happens to everybody else? What happens to everybody out there who's watching this program?
If everything's dedicated to the plant.
To the plant, right. What public water companies, we'll get into some of the numbers a little bit later, but basically the other thing that's just mind-boggling to me and to Donna and to some other folks who have looked at this is the director of DRBC would, in essence, have unilateral control to make any decisions after August 28th. Okay, so if somebody has a claim that they want to bring, their water's been damaged, their well's been completely dried up, one person would hear any claim if the claim is deemed adequate to be heard. That same person would say, sorry, Mr. Lawrence, you don't have a claim. That's the end of it. Or
one person.
Yeah,
one person.
One person. So we think that that's beyond egregious. Couple of things that people need to know. These permits are proposed. This is not a done deal.
Okay.
I mean, we've been told in this community many times over the last 15 years, get out of the way, it's a done deal. Well, we're being told essentially the same thing right now, and our message to this community and every elected official who represents this community, this is not a done deal, and we're not getting out of the way. This is about everybody's water. The last thing I want to say that we're going to highlight a couple of times during the program is all of this information has been distilled. It's been researched. It's been summarized. There will be executive summaries on the ACE website, which is going to be listed for
we're
people
going to get
here.
into some of the details. Just
Yep.
a couple comments on what you had to say. So we're going to be talking about what's going into the river and also what's coming out of the river
Absolutely.
at the same time. Okay,
Absolutely.
and this thing about them being able to take unlimited amounts of water as a result of an accident or a meltdown. Do you think that's any way related to Fukushima? We don't have the same kind of water supply source that the Fukushima is along, where there's a big body of water.
Right. Yeah. There's no Sea of Japan here.
Right. We don't have the Sea of
Exactly,
Japan. So
exactly.
do you think that this may be a result?
Well,
of that, because they're going to need water if
They're gonna
something
need water.
happens.
Yeah, Donna
that way.
can speak to this issue because if there is a serious problem, what they have on site is just woefully inadequate, and they're going to need every drop of water that's available from every source.
Exactly.
And public be damned if
Right.
that happens.
So that rubs water from everybody else, the citizens especially. And maybe you can answer this, maybe you can't, Luke. The DRBC and the DEP, do they have equal authority in Pennsylvania? Is one submissive to the other? Do they work in tandem with each other? How does that work?
Well, 2 out of 3.
Okay.
They work in tandem. The PADEP is, by law, the Environmental Protection Agency for Pennsylvania. So they have primary say over a number of things, including the NPDES water permit that's being proposed here.
Mm-hmm.
The DRBC doesn't have authority over the DEP per se, because it's a regional consortium. I think in some previous programs we explained to people that the Delaware River Basin Commission is a quasi-legal judicial organization consortium that representing 4 states, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Delaware. And each governor gets 1 seat on that panel. And they literally are responsible for the health and wellness of the waters that affect all 4 states coming out of that Delaware River basin.
Our representatives, the senators in Pennsylvania and representatives in Pennsylvania legislature, they have control over both of those, or primarily only over DEP?
Primarily over the DEP.
Okay.
However, it's my conclusion, and a number of people have reached the same conclusion, is that elected officials in Pennsylvania have authority over the DRBC.
Okay.
So, for example, Governor Corbett has 1 of 4 governor's seats, which means he's got 1 of 4 votes for anything of any significance. And elected officials have input and direct access to the governor on issues of major importance, and doesn't get much more important than everybody's water.
So, folks, this is what I'm saying. I mean, I'm just taking from what Dr. Cuthbert is saying. Ultimately, we have the control as the people of Pennsylvania, if you have a will to exercise that control through your representatives. They end up making these decisions, and we end up making the decisions about them getting into office, right? So we have a way as Pennsylvanians to make a difference here. And I think the information that Dr. Cuthbert and Don are going to share with us tonight should open your eyes to a lot of things that are taking place. When I read this report, I was surprised myself and was looking forward to doing this show. So, Donna, you want to get into some of these details, perhaps, as to what's going on?
Yeah, I'd actually like to get into the injustice of this, Nick. This is about Exelon taking public water for private profit.
Okay.
And what they're doing is unimaginable, what these agencies are willing to let them do. And the problem, where I really have a huge problem, is that ever since we first realized there was a problem with Limerick's cooling towers using too much water, we have been asking a lot of questions to DRBC, and they don't even feel obligated to respond to us. And we've sent packets to all our elected officials. They're well aware of a lot of these problems, the elected officials. And I guarantee you that unless the public doesn't start contacting the elected officials, they have not really spoken up and tried to do anything about this. And now's the time. We're at a turning point. They either start to speak up to try to protect people's water, or they're on the side of Exelon's profits too. And DRBC has absolutely been biased in this whole situation from the very beginning. There was never enough water in the Schuylkill River to sustain the nuclear plant. Public hearing records clearly show that. And what has happened is DRBC just caved in and let this project happen. And the proof of that is that Exelon had to build a diversion project from the Delaware River. That's all the proof we need. There was never enough water in the Schuylkill River. And now here we are, all these years later, we're looking at what the consequences of that are, both in depletion and the concentration of toxics due to this nuclear plant. And now that we've got droughts and all the other things going on, this is a really, really serious threat.
I think anybody that drives by the Schuylkill will notice that the water levels are low, and primarily that happens in the summertime. And if we have a winter like last winter where there's hardly any snow, there's not a lot of water in the wintertime either.
No, and it's not just a matter of fiction. There have been a lot of waterways in our nation that have actually dried up.
Exactly.
And you know, this is worse from Exelon than this is the worst threat to water we've ever looked at, because first of all, it's about radiation discharges always into the Schuylkill River, and it's also about this huge depletion. Cooling towers, there's nothing to match that. And the thing that's really bad about this is that all the decisions that DRBC is willing to cave into are going to further jeopardize water, and not only from here, Nick, but water from across 6 different counties: Montgomery, Chester, Berks, Bucks, Schuylkill, and Philadelphia. All those counties, 6 counties, are impacted by these decisions that are going to happen. So the people in our audience, if they know people that live in Philadelphia or any other place, from Schuylkill County all the way down, we'll explain a little bit more how that happens.
So it's a logical conclusion, if there's less water in the river and we're putting in more pollutants into the river, that the concentration of those pollutants that are in the river are going to get greater, and then the hazard to our health gets greater.
That's correct.
Is that a logical conclusion?
That is a logical conclusion. Not only is that logical, but also it can mean more cost for public water, for people to pay for their water. They get it from the Schuylkill River from all the different companies.
So aren't they really
from Pottstown to Philadelphia?
So aren't they really just getting a permit to pollute the river?
That's what DEP's National Pollutant Discharge Permit is. This is called an NPDES permit. Every one of those is a permit to pollute the river. It's giving Exelon total permission to do that. So that's what it means. And in this case, what the DEP has decided to do, and DRBC says fine with them, is that the worst pollution from Limerick, which is the radionuclides and the cooling tower toxics in the form of total dissolved solids, coming out pipe 001, which is the pipe we'll talk about most of the time, tonight. They've just excluded it from having to follow the Clean Water Act standards.
As if it's not even there.
Yeah.
Right.
And the safe drinking water standard for that is 500 milligrams per liter. They couldn't even meet the 1,000 milligrams per liter that they were given earlier. In fact, they violated during the 2010. 13 out of 15 samples that we looked at were far higher than 1,000, and one went all the way up to over 2,400. Wow. So that's how bad it is. Requiring them. We're just going to give them the permit and ignore that. They can have it. They call it an exclusion for the cooling towers. It's really pathetic. It is tragic, and it is infuriating. And people need to get to that public hearing and speak up about this. This is really an injustice I've never seen.
Luke, go ahead.
I just want to reinforce one of Donna's comments here. You know, when you look at the outrage of this entire scenario here, sometimes it's easy to miss the fact that there is a potential solution here. We're going to talk about this a couple of times during this hour. You know, Limerick can actually filter the water they use, all of it, whether we're talking Wadesville Mine or the intake from the Schuylkill or the output from the infamous or nefarious outfall 001. They can filter all of this, water in, water out, and they should do that or actually close this plant. But neither of these agencies has any intent right now to ask them to do any of this. Their answer to all of these pollution violations is, let's just wave a magic wand and go poof, you know, no more regulations.
And the problem is just because they omit the Exelon from having to comply with this at Limerick doesn't mean we're not exposed to it. That doesn't take away the risk.
So there's never been any filtration of the water?
No.
Ever since the plant's been built?
Exactly.
All of those years and all of those millions of gallons that we'll discuss later on going in and coming out hasn't been filtered.
That's correct.
That's exactly right.
Sad but true, Nick.
And we've been asking for a public hearing, Nick, ever since 2006. And we had a fight for it, back and forth, and finally Senator Casey's office was instrumental in getting them to agree to a public hearing. But look at this, it's 2012, and now we're having the public hearing. And all those years, all these things went on without any, you see what I mean? So everything, we couldn't even discuss it in front of the public in all these years because we had not, in fact, we weren't the only ones mad about that. The Mercury actually gave DEP and DRBC thorns for allowing all this to happen. So we were happy to see that.
Over the years, Lou, we've discussed radiation and its effects on people, and that we've had authorities here have talked about that there's no really true safe level of radiation.
Correct.
And so people think, though, when you think about pollution, my concept is, there's some particulate, some suspended particulate in the water that you can see, but radiation is sinister. It's in the water. People don't know that it's in there. They're not going to be able to taste it or filter it at home out, I would assume anyway. Is that so, or am I making a mistake about that?
Well, people, if they can afford it, can buy carbon filtration and a reverse osmosis.
Radiation out?
It will take a reverse osmosis that you're saying, not all of it.
Okay.
But it will remove some of it. Reverse osmosis at your kitchen sink with a pre and post carbon. In addition to that, it is a good way to try to remove some of those.
But for those who don't do that, which is most people, they have no idea. They have no idea that there's radiation in the water.
And in the first place, neither should they have to pay to do that, because Limerick Exelon is making billions. Putting that pollution in the river. They should be responsible, and we know that they can filter it. The idea for a couple last few years, we can't filter it, that's not even possible, and they even said that is absolutely not true. They can filter it. We call the water company. They can design a reverse osmosis system to filter that stuff out at the end of the pipe. So
Donna suggested that's untrue. I'm going to go one step further, Nick. I want to suggest that that's another whopper foisted upon this community by Exelon and Limerick Nuclear Plant. Because they don't want to do it and they don't want to pay for it, they've said, you can't do it. Now, if that were not bad enough, the DEP says, we agree. DEP basically has said, we don't think this can be filtered. And then you read about, 8 paragraphs later, and the small print says using conventional water filtration. Hello, conventional water filtration is not going to get radiation.
The water company, they left. I mean, that is really pathetic. Well, anyway.
Well, can we ask a basic question?
Sure.
What's radiation doing in the water?
That's right.
I mean, you don't think in terms of that. There are natural occurring radiations in certain areas, but you don't think in terms of additive pollutants that is radiation.
No.
Why should people even think that there should be radiation in the
And
water?
until we actually got a hold of the environmental monitoring report and the NPDES permit for Limerick and read all that stuff, we believed like everybody else they lied. They said they weren't putting radiation into the Schuylkill River. That was such a lie. It's just pathetic. Not only they put it in there, but we can't know how much or all the different kinds of radionuclides. There's over 100 different kinds of radionuclides associated with Limerick operations. So any of that could be in there, and they're not even looking for it.
I know this is a really emotional discussion today, but I want to make sure we get an opportunity to get the facts out to people as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've dealt with some of those issues in some previous programs. Tonight I want to deal with the water, the flow of water, okay? Because I'm going to suggest to people, if you're sitting out there watching this program and someday you turn on your faucet and there's no water, or you turn on your shower and there's no water because of what's happened as a result of these permits, all of us are to blame. So everybody needs to come out to this hearing. Now, just a couple of things. You know, I've said it, I think at the top, that unprecedented water use and abuse is the title of this program. And I've characterized Exelon and Limerick nuclear plant as being water hogs, in essence, saying, we give us more and more and more. Well, let's take a look at what they've asked for and what is proposed that they get, Nick. We're talking about the Schuylkill River currently with a draw of 56.2 million gallons per day, all right? Exelon's asked for an additional 2 million gallons a day. So they want to go 2 million more gallons every single day, just from the Schuylkill River.
And just to put that in context, Pottstown and Norristown together, that's 2.5 times more than all of Pottstown and all the Norristown together. Pottstown, 5 million for 30,000 people. Norristown, 17 million for 87,000 people. Go figure. And they are 2.5 times as much. They've been doing that for a long time. Now they want 2 million more a day.
Yeah, more and more and more.
More and more.
Not to be confused with anything remotely resembling that in terms of a popular song from a couple of decades ago. You knew where I was going there. Yeah. Cooling towers, more water for the cooling towers. They want up to 44 million gallons per day for the cooling towers. The Perkiomen Creek, which is coming from the Delaware River, they are asking for up to 42 million gallons per day from that source. They also, if that were not bad enough, Nick, they're also asking for increased withdrawals from Tamaqua and Owl Creek reservoirs, and they want unlimited access to all of the water if there's an emergency, and they're asking to permanently approve the disastrous Wadesville mine pool water project that has been laughingly called a quote unquote demonstration project for 8 years.
Mm-hmm. And just in the permit, they can continue to pump, but this is the amount: 432 million gallons a month at 10,000 gallons per minute. That is contaminated water they're putting in there again.
That's Wadesville.
And
that's from Wadesville.
That's
right.
Wadesville.
And we're saying to the no. We want everybody to come out to the hearing and say no. They can't put that in there unfiltered. If they're going to put it in there, they need to filter it.
But it's an admission that the water levels in the Schuylkill are low. Otherwise, why would they have to supply additional water?
Especially contaminated. That goes to show you how biased two these agencies are. There's DEP saying that this mine water is the worst threat to groundwater in the state, but they're the cheerleaders for Exelon pumping it into here unfiltered.
Does the term hypocritical come to mind for any of our viewers, Nick?
One more thing before we leave this, really important to me. This maybe of all the things we read, I want people out there to realize they should not be silent about this. The DRBC executive director is going to be given unilateral control over whether Exelon will have to replace, repair, or mitigate for dry or otherwise unusable wells or surface water supplies due to Limerick's operations. That is in the docket. They're going to give that to him. This is a biased
one person.
And evidence shows, all the evidence that we've collected shows that DRBC has not made decisions on the behalf of public water, but rather on the behalf of Exelon's profits. So this is really bad. Get out to the public hearing and speak up about this.
Next thing, you're going to take your shoe off and pound it on the table here.
Either pound it or throw it.
People really have to realize what's going on here.
They do.
Anything can happen, and you get no reimbursement. You have no water. What good is your house?
We need to talk about water temperatures in this segment of this program, and Donna is one of the experts on this subject, just based on the research. But we've talked about heated discharges, and we've seen pictures of thermal discharges where it's really hot. The water going into the river, we're talking like 14 million gallons a day going into the river from this plant, and it's heated and it's radiated. We've talked about this in some previous programs. But now we're going to talk just a little bit about the temperatures, because these permits, in my judgment, Nick, play games with temperature limits.
Remember what the hot water looks like coming out of there? All right.
We've seen that
well, now we know through these dockets and things that they're allowed to put it into the river at 110 degrees. However, the temperature of the river is not supposed to exceed 87 degrees. Now, they know from testing at Royersford, which is 2 miles downstream from Limerick's discharges, that the river has repeatedly exceeded those levels, those limits. Now, the problem is they're not going to do anything about it. Both DRBC and DEP are willing to hand out both of those permits, knowing that this has been going on. They've been heating this water for over 27 years. So why wouldn't it be higher than 87 degrees? And there's another whole thing about a 59-degree temperature restriction, which was originally put in place before Limerick was constructed to protect the flow and the water quality conditions for the river. And DRBC eliminated that now from their docket.
Do we know what effect heated water has on aquatic life?
well, yeah,
It's not good.
It's not
Right,
good.
obviously.
The oxygen, and
Right.
it's about the oxygen in the water. And DEP or DRBC allowed Exelon to run all around, knowing you can find places in the river where you're going to find it's details which can find.
Without getting into a lot of the minutia here, Nick, I think we can describe the potential effects of that in 2 words: fish kills.
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Does anybody care about the environment or the aquatic life, everything that's related to the rivers and streams?
Well,
like
I'd say that everybody who uses the river for recreation, or if they like to go fishing or whatever they want to do for that river, they need to get out to this public hearing and object to the what they've done about the river temperatures. And you want to know, just email us.
Nick, I'd like to make one point, and I'd like to do it briefly. We've talked about this in some previous programs. There's a real problem here that we've pointed out a couple of times over the past several years. Monitoring, calculating, testing, and reporting, all controlled by Exelon. All highly unreliable and unprotective in terms of public perspective and the consequences here. There are 24 discharge points here. The really big bad one is
If you remember the
001.
graphic there,
That's where the radioactive and highly toxic chemical discharges go into the river.
And here, Nick, to give you some idea,
Donna has a
they
schematic.
come from the cooling towers and they go down here, and this is the really bad discharge point into the river that they're trying to exempt from the permit.
But there are 24
conditions.
discharge points. One of them is the one that you feel is the
That's
most toxic.
Oh, yes,
the
exactly.
001.
Exactly.
Okay.
And to give you how bad the monitoring requirements are, this pipe only has to be monitored twice a month, and not for the radiation and the cooling tower toxics, but other things. And the rest of these 23 points only have to be monitored once a year. So I mean, that is just
And it's
monitoring doesn't
self-monitoring
protect
by
people's
Exelon
water.
does self-monitoring. They're permitted to do that.
That's
Yes.
correct.
And
Yes.
occasionally it's monitored by the DEP. Is that what you're saying?
Occasionally,
The water in the river sometimes is not Limerick's discharges, but the water in the river.
yeah.
And it really, the whole trick is, even if they monitor there, they don't monitor for the things that are most harmful to people. And that's the problem. They don't, they don't report that, and they're just overlooking it.
DEP, in my judgment, Nick, is the proverbial blind squirrel, just kind of rummaging around. Every once in a while they find a nut,
Right.
But more often than not, they don't have any idea what's going on.
And there's a
It's
whole
a
bunch
shame.
of toxics they don't even monitor for that are up in those cooling towers.
So we have limited time in this segment. Is there something specific that you guys want to bring to the table before we take a break?
I'd like Donna to just speak to for a minute about just the travesty and the tragedy of this proposed giveaway of all this water at the expense of everybody else who's out there. I mean, if Exelon and Limerick Nuclear Plant take all of this water, everybody else suffers.
And there are things that we've decided that could limit the problems here, which we're going to be talking about at the end of the show. But this is an injustice that the people in the community just shouldn't put up with. They need to get out to the public hearing and speak up for their families, because if they don't, no one else will. The officials have been, Exelon's been around buying silence and support from the officials and groups and whatever, but your water is at risk regardless of all these other things. So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say to Nick that it seems to me, I mean, just looking at this, just it kind of boggles the mind. It seems to me that Exelon and Limerick Nuclear Power Plant have used the services of a consulting group for public relations, spin, propaganda, and other things that could best be called good enough and poof. Lots of things are good enough. Well, that's good enough, that's good enough. Mm-hmm. And they would have us abandon common sense. We put it into the river, poof, it's gone. No threat, no risk, no harm, no foul. I mean, they would ask us and everybody watching this program to just totally abandon common sense.
And there's one thing I'd like to get people straight on. If you read the permits, or they tell you that they are treating the water at water companies or Exelon's treating it, don't believe for 1 minute that is making your water really safer, because treatment is not filtration. What we found is very often treatment means that they're adding toxic chemicals to the water along.
Before we take a break, wasn't there a recent problem at the plant that it took a number of days for them to tell us about it, or to even tell the
Absolutely,
okay.
and that's a really good point.
Just give us a
March
minute on
19th of 2012, Limerick had a radioactive spill, and what we found out from that is that they do not report these things immediately. They wait. They waited 23 days to report it to the public, and what that meant was that people didn't have a chance to even protect themselves, not drink the water in their houses. The water treatment companies couldn't do anything about it. In fact, we met with one water treatment guy who actually told us that his water company found out about it in the newspaper. And Exelon claims the water treatment company water was tested, but they're the ones who went to the water companies to test it, and I suppose they're very limited people there knew about it.
The Fox not only is watching the hen house, the Fox owns a hen house.
And built it, I believe.
And built it, yes. Yeah. And will be responsible for dismantling it, but that's another story.
Right, I think so.
Yep.
I think we're going to take a break, folks. We have some guests to be on this show with us. And, hopefully this information is getting to you, is getting into you, you're thinking about it. You always can go to ACE's website, absolutely, to get all the information we're talking about here tonight. And you need to think about these things. We have a lot. ACE has a lot of emotion about this, but it's based on fact. They're passionate about it. We all need to be passionate about it if we care about ourselves and our kids and our future. So we're going to take a break. We'll be back after this, so stay with us. Welcome back, everybody, to the ACE Report. If you're just joining us, I'm here tonight with Donna Cuthbert. Lou Cuthbert was just on in our first segment. We brought some special guests in to talk about our topic tonight. And before we get started with that, again, I'd like to remind you, go to the ACE's website, which is acereport.org. acereport.org. Everything that we're talking about, all the information is there. You'll be able to check that out for yourself. Folks, well, with us on the program tonight, we have two special guests who are actually involved in concerned community members, and they've been concerned about what's going on at the nuclear power plant even before it was constructed. So with us tonight we have Betty and Charlie Shank. Guys, welcome to the show. We'd like to welcome you to the show.
Nice to be here.
You guys have a story to tell. You have something to tell our audience about. So Betty, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Well, we've been members of this area, residents of this area, for over 30 years. We had just moved into Limerick when the Limerick nuclear reactor site was made public. And I wasn't all that comfortable with it being 3 miles from our house. Mm-hmm. We had a child there at the time, and so I did some reading. I decided, okay, I need to educate myself and I'll be more comfortable with it. These people are comfortable with it, I'll be all right. So I read, and the more I read, the less comfortable I became, and eventually it seemed to me that the power plant officials and the agencies that were there to respond to the public and inviting public comment were not all that responsive to concerns that were being brought up. They kind of brushed them off. Mm-hmm. So we joined Limerick Ecology Action, and at the time there were a lot of environmental issues. The Schuylkill River was one of them. Way back then they were talking about there wasn't enough water. Lots of talk about that. And over time, not too long a time, Limerick Ecology Action figured out that the only way they could maybe get some protection for the public was maybe to file a suit. So they did that. They filed a suit against the plant for violating environmental standards and for not considering design alternatives for their reactor. They won that suit. But it dragged on for 9 years. By the time the judge made the ruling, the plant was built, it was approved, you couldn't stop it, it was big.
So there may have been something in that it took that long, right? It was a done deal before.
The Mercury reported on it, and they titled the story, David Against Federal Goliath.
Wow.
I mean, they did a great report on it. And I really thought that I'd never see anything like it again, and we kind of drifted away from the issues, thinking during the time of the suit that things would work out. We moved up here to Pottstown just a little over a year ago, and I could have dropped my teeth when I discovered that here they are, Exelon's asking for relicensing in the wake of Fukushima. With all the problems we've encountered, I couldn't believe it. I saw there was a hearing for it, Charlie and I, so we went. It was at that hearing that we saw that officials were just as unresponsive, if not more so. Now, ACE was there, we joined up. Since then, our story has gone in a lot of different directions, but we are very, very compelled by the information we have seen they've gathered, archives of information, hours and hours and hours of research done by them, and it's, for me, very compelling.
So Donna, when you hear a story like Betty's telling, what's your first impression of that? What do you think of that?
Well, I'll tell you what I think of it. I think I'm thankful there was a Limerick ecology action, and while they didn't, they won the suit, it wasn't effective, but all those public hearing records, all those people that testified, we've been able to get those and have a better understanding now of all these Schuylkill River issues. So I'm thankful for them, and I'm urging anybody who's out in the audience who also belonged to Limerick Ecology Action way back when to please call us and get involved. Come to this public hearing. These are about the things you were worried about way back then.
So Charlie, you have a perspective on what you call the use and abuse of public water resources for profit.
Yes, I do. I wanted to say something about meeting them again. Last fall, when we went to the NRC meeting in Sunnybrook Ballroom, we met them, and Lou and I had been to Ursinus together, played soccer together, so we knew them from before. And one of the people we met there, a lady, was interested in trying to obtain information about earthquake faults in the area. She had heard that there were some faults there. She requested maps from the NRC. She waited and waited for months, literally, and finally was given a map that was incomplete, not very clear. It was almost smudged to some degree. And we both thought, well, there's got to be something better than this that they're giving her. So we went to the Pottstown Library, looked around. Sure enough, there are a series of big white binders there from PICO at the time when they were first doing the plant. And as we paged through, we found a really beautiful map by the U.S. Geological Survey of this area. And sure enough, right at the site of the plant, there's a fault running practically underneath something in there. It goes right through the property, so I don't know what it goes underneath, but it's called the Sanatoga Fault. So, of course, we got a little bit aroused here and suspicious, and we took it back to Lou and Donna and showed them what we had found. It made us feel that there was very little trust in Exelon. Why did this line disappear? Here's a line in 1974 on the map, and then subsequent maps, the line's not there. The fault line is not there.
So it actually was taken away from subsequent maps.
Yeah.
Or it seems that way,
the
right?
map that this lady got.
There's no line there
From
anymore.
the NRC.
By the NRC map. It's still there on the USGS map that was in the Pottstown Library.
Maybe it healed itself.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it was a fault that may have corrected itself.
And that really is relevant now, Nick, because we said, of course, what would happen if we had an accident or meltdown over there that could be triggered by an earthquake? earthquake, it would be devastating to the water of the people in our region, because Exelon, in these permits that are being, the draft permits that are having a public hearing about, they could draw as much water as they need from any source, from anywhere. They can run everybody's water dry. We don't have a Sea of Japan. So, and they can have it for up to 30 days and whatever. So they're very relevant what they found, because now we know there's four earthquake faults within 17 miles of that place. And it's just with the risk getting higher and higher for earthquakes.
So, Donna,
so here we are with a water
Let's
threat.
clarify. I think we either mentioned this or we didn't mention in our first section. People were talking about the Schuylkill River as a source of water and other tributaries. But what about groundwater? What if there's a need for groundwater?
That's the thing too. If people that live around Limerick think, gee, I'm on a well, I'm not going to worry. Through this one docket, we realized they can withdraw 73.2 million gallons per year in groundwater at Limerick. This is not just drawing all this water in from the Schuylkill River. They're also taking 73 million gallons a year in groundwater.
Just for operation, you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's 4 on-site wells on there, and just for regular operations. And they can, if there's a meltdown, they can just take all that away, because we found out there's only 48 hours worth of water on that site. You know, they tell everybody, oh, we store water, don't worry about it. They store water 48 hours, and that includes everything that's in the cooling towers.
Aren't they required to have 30
and they're supposed to have
supply?
a 30-day supply. What they're trying to tell people they're having for a 30-day supply is anybody's guess. But
It's our river.
Charlie brings up a really good point. It's the question of mistrust. We can't trust Exelon, and anybody who wants to find out why, we've listed a whole bunch of stuff here and elsewhere on our website in a section called Why We Can't Trust Exelon.
So, Charlie, your perspective as to why. If all this information's out there, Exelon knows the information, they've known the information.
That's right.
They, some sense, are not getting that information out to the public. So what is the reason why, knowing all of this stuff, the toxicity of the plant, the risks involved, why do you think it's being done?
Well, it makes me feel it's done on purpose so that it can sort of hide this fact. Just in Virginia, a short time ago, there was a company found guilty of falsifying things that they had sent in, information about their plant. So I don't know. The thing is, you're never sure exactly what's happening, but you certainly have your suspicions. And of course, it would be very difficult to prove. When we took this information to the NRC meeting, those members looked at us. I mean, we could tell they were surprised to hear about this. This was like, oh, you know, where did this come from?
As if it were a revelation to them?
Right.
They'd never seen that map.
Did Exelon even tell them how much was it kept in-house, so to speak, and how much was out there?
I think Charlie brings up a very good point. I think even about the water, because we don't think the employees on site really realize how much at risk their water that they may be using. Who knows? I'm sure they filter it. I think it must filter it in some way for their employees. They won't want their, but who knows? And we don't know out of those other 23 discharge points, they monitoring once a year. There's nobody that knows.
But why wouldn't our agencies know this stuff?
They look their other way, and I'll tell you how we know this. The Wadesville mine, remember? They are, we met a guy who was a 30-year employee at DEP. We didn't meet him, he was a whistleblower. 30-year employee at DEP. He worked at Wadesville Mine. He said that water can't be approved for being put into the Schuylkill River. He goes and finds out that they had taken tap water, and that's the water they were using to test it. He goes to the DEP guys. He found that out from one of his old buddies at the Wadesville Mine. And he goes to DEP, and they said they didn't care. So if you ask why, these guys just go to work, they do their job, and they don't think about the consequences of these decisions they're making. Even if they do, they don't care.
And it's to protect the profits.
I think some
And
of
it's to protect the Exelon's profits, but he has a very good point.
So they can't hide behind ignorance, though, really.
No.
So either they don't know, they can say, we don't know, we don't realize, or what you guys are saying, ultimately, they don't care. And that's why I asked the question, what is the reason why? Profit versus people.
Right, and I think some of the people that aren't the executives and making these high-up decisions do care, In fact, if you read some of these permits or you see what goes on behind the scenes, some of them care, but they can't say anything. They feel, or they get fired. Whistleblowers usually get fired, you know.
As we got into this and looking at things with Don and Buzz, we realized that these agencies pass the buck. They change the numbers and the regulated amounts as they go along. And in many, all of them, in many cases, they don't measure. NRC, for example, never measures anything over there, and they monitor themselves. So it's very easy. They're letting them get away with this without any recourse, really.
It seems to us.
I'd like to mention one other thing before I forget it. Don't forget this plant has asked for a 20% upgrade. They want to run this plant faster, hotter, more, 20% more when they have trouble maintaining it as it is. We can hardly go 3 months without something happening over there that needs attention.
Right.
And it's not a good idea.
Before we go, Betty, why don't you talk to us about this upcoming hearing, what you feel about it, how important it is, and why you think people should attend?
I really think they should attend because I don't feel as if we have any protection unless we speak up. I think that it would actually help the officials to speak up to Exelon. I think Exelon might be very, very powerful. They make tremendous profits from what we have seen, and they actually don't put a lot of money into upgrades. I've seen Money Magazine, you know, different kinds of magazines on money, and they talk to that point. They are praised for not doing expensive upgrades. Those expensive upgrades would protect us, but they wouldn't protect their bottom line.
Or something like you've discussed about the filtration of the water. It's not like
That's
there's
right.
no technology to do that. The technologies, the reverse osmosis technologies, they're not doing it.
They're not doing it. They choose not to
Right.
do it because they don't want to spend money. In the meantime, they jeopardize public health and higher costs for the public's water. And it's just not fair. Taking it all, the eminent domain part of just taking as much as they want, public water for private profit, that is just wrong. What about all the other businesses from Pottstown to Philadelphia who need it for water? What about the almost 2 million people who need it from Pottstown to Philadelphia? It is just an injustice of major proportions, and it impacts everybody.
And
So, go ahead. No, good, Betty.
Well, I was going to say, we sat down and we were talking about this, and suddenly it occurred to us that for their consumption of the Schuylkill River and possibly all the water in the area, pulling it out of the groundwater, taking it from the wells, and giving us no protection in the way of insurance or monetary redress. They only produce, with these 2 reactors out of the 104 in the whole country, 1/2 of 1% of the energy in this country. And we're asked to sacrifice 100% of it.
100% of our
And they've
water.
addressed that in there by talking about that redress.
Right. Well, guys, I want to thank you for being on the
Thank
show.
you
It's
very
been
much for
certainly
having
great to
us.
have you bring another testimony and an encouragement for people to attend the upcoming hearing. Folks, our guests have been Betty and Charlie Shank. We're going to take another break. We'll be back with a wrap-up with Dr. Lou Cuthbert coming back on the show with us, so stay with us. Welcome back, everybody, to the Ace Reporter. Welcome if you're just joining us. We've been talking about really important issues throughout the entire show tonight. you'll be able to watch our show again, obviously, and we had some special guests on there. But we are back now. Dr. Lou Cuthbert is with me, and Donna Cuthbert is here. And Lou, we have some points that we want to wrap up before we enter the show tonight. Any particular things you'd like to mention?
Let me start with just a couple of conclusions and observations, if I may. In looking at all of this information for some time, it's become really clear and painful to us that the DEP and the DRBC have just gone to extraordinary lengths to accommodate Exelon. I mean, just loopholes, exemptions, exclusions, ignoring, overlooking, forgetting, forgiving violations, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just unprecedented. I mean, the use and abuse of the river by Exelon, we consider unprecedented. The failure to protect and what I call regulatory malpractice of DEP and DRBC, in my judgment, again, just unprecedented. In your last segment, you spoke with Betty and Charlie Shank, and Charlie made an observation that really resonated with me. In looking at some of this stuff, I mean, that was just beyond the pale. Exelon is going to be given 30 months. That's 2.5 years. 2.5 years after permits are issued to play with the data is my characterization. Mm-hmm. They're going to be asked to compile, chart, and present information rather than comply with anything. 2.5 years after they get the permit in hands, with all of these violations on the table in plain view.
And it's at least a 5-year permit.
Yeah, it's at least a 5-year permit. Charlie said something that really resonated with me. He said, that's about as reasonable as you or I going to the IRS and saying, we'd like to create our own tax bracket.
So
think about that for a second.
I'm speechless, right? That's
So
the way it would be.
during this 5 years of the permit, they're also planning to get up rates after they get the relicensing. They're also planning to get all these things that'll be harmful. You know what I mean? It's outrageous. How in the world could anybody that cares anything about people or their water or the river allow radiation and cooling tower toxics to go into that river without putting a limit on it? The total dissolved solids, that's what it's all about. They're just handing out the permit without a limit. It's not right.
Or filters. Limits or filters.
That's what we say.
Something.
Either Exelon should filter it or close the plant. One or the other. And they're not going to do it on their own. So DEP and DRBC should be made to do that. And they're not going to do that unless the elected officials speak up. And they're not going to do that unless the public comes to this hearing and speaks out.
Well, I may be wrong about this, and maybe my brain doesn't work well as it should, but it seems a bit counterintuitive to think that they give you the permits first, look at the data later. Yeah. They should
Correct.
be looking at the data before the permits are granted to see whether it is a viable thing and it's actually going to work out the way they assume it's going to work out. Wouldn't that make sense?
Yes. We think you should go to work for DRBC.
No, we'd like you to be the next director of DRBC.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Or DEP. Just as an aside here, this is a real question about credibility and objectivity. I'm not sure that viewers will remember this, but in previous programming, we made it pretty clear to people that the current director of DRBC was a previous high-level employee of the Pennsylvania DEP. The current head of Pennsylvania DEP, appointed by Governor Corbett, is a former Exelon attorney. Does anybody out there believe that this is a level playing field?
They can be objective in any way.
Exactly.
Right? How can they be objective if they have a vested interest from their past history in some way, or a connection to these things?
Neither agency is objective in this, and that's why it is so more important than ever before for people to get out to that hearing. It really is critical. One other point I just wanted to mention, the mine water project, and then Exelon's also taken water from the Tamaqua reservoirs, 2 of them. Well, all this water gets sent down the Schuylkill River, and the problem is, like in the Wades Mill mine, for example, that only ever started out to be $3.6 billion. Well, they're allowed to take almost $500 million a month.
Wow.
So all this water is being recharged from the groundwater up there, so it's a huge transport of groundwater from one region to another. And so the people up there could even worry about wells drying up from Limerick nuclear plant.
So Lou, we have about 7 minutes. Can you give us a synopsis of what you think people should be thinking about, the necessity, the urgency to attend the hearing on August the 28th? Give us what should be done, or do you want to do that, or do you want something else first?
One more thing, because people from Philadelphia need to be informed about this too. because if you recall, Philadelphia last spring was found to have the highest level of
Right.
radiation in their water out of 66 water companies tested across the U.S. They had the highest one. Philadelphia is just 20 miles downstream from Limerick's discharges. And Limerick discharges the kind of radiation that was found down there. There is a definite link,
Right.
and so it affects everybody.
Iodine 131.
Yeah, iodine 131. They discharge it into the river, and they're clearly, in all the discharges they have to be accidental and routine. And so if you look all around along the river, everybody's involved in this. It doesn't matter where you are, who you are, come to the hearing and speak out.
Yeah, this is everyone's issue and everyone's battle, Nick, as Donna suggested. If you're anywhere that you can either see or hear this program, you really need to attend this hearing August 28th at Sunnybrook. I want to go back and repeat something I said at the top of the hour. You know, this is not a done deal. This community's been told that before, and that was wrong then. It's wrong now. This is not a done deal. A couple of things can happen before these permits are issued, and we're going to have on our screen for viewers as I'm explaining some of this, and on our website, acereport.org, detailed information. What can you do? Well, you can join us in asking elected officials. We said earlier, they're the key. Elected officials, all of them. Okay, there'll be lists of them. If you don't know who your elected officials are, state or federal, you know, you can look it up or ask us for that information as well. We all need to ask our elected officials to go to DEP and Governor Corbett and ask for any one of 7 things. We think all 7 of these are both reasonable and necessary, Nick. First thing, remove the exemption for radiation and cooling toxics into the Schuylkill River. No reason for that. Just knock that down. Second thing, require strict enforcement and meaningful penalties for violations. We heard throughout this program, a lot of violations on the books, nothing ever happened. Okay, take out your regulatory stick and hit these guys. You know, do your job, DEP. Third, require independent comprehensive testing for a lot of reasons. We've been asking for this for years. You can't trust the fox to watch the hands.
Exactly.
Number 4, require immediate notification of radioactive spills. You mentioned the spill in March. It was like 23 days before people had any clue that happened. We're saying immediate. Number 5, ask DEP and Governor Corbett to require Exelon to maintain records permanently. These permits suggest all they have to do is keep records for 3 years. If you or I tried to get away, yeah, that's it, 3.
Some of those radionuclides that they discharge into the river last for thousands of years, and they're keeping these records 3 years.
3 years, good enough and poof, I mentioned earlier? Yeah, good enough. 2 more items on this list. Number 6, require Exelon to filter or close Limerick. We've said that repeatedly. Either filter or shut this place down. Anything else is irresponsible. And the last item on that list is require reverse osmosis filtration, which Donna explained earlier in this program to protect the river and public health. That's what we can request from DEP and Governor Corbett. Second list, what can we request through elected officials from DRBC? So elected officials and Governor Corbett can ask DRBC to stop destroying the water supply. Don't allow increased water from all these sources. Stop the mine water pumping. Don't issue this docket without some kind of total dissolved solid limit. Require Limerick to reduce operations or shut down when the Schuylkill River temp exceeds 87 degrees. Number 5, require unannounced independent testing for several things that they're just giving away. Low flows, temperature restrictions, and all radiation and toxics. 2 more. Require the public notice and input for all future nuclear plant water use. This docket and permit from DRBC, in essence, would take away the public's right to ever speak about this after August 28th and the public comment period, which is October 27th. And we've said we absolutely have to have an independent mediator to hear and adjudicate any water-related claims. Not one person who was the head of an agency that previously approved the construction of this plant knowing there wasn't enough water. You know, the last thing that I want to say, and I know you're going to close this up in your usual eloquent style, Nick, is
hopefully so.
We need to step up, stand up, and speak out as a community on August 28th. There's going to be information on the screen about where you can send written comments between August 28th and October 27th. If you can't make it to this public hearing, and we sure hope that you do appear, then, you know, the least that you need to do is email, fax, or write your elected officials, and all the information's available on this program and on our website. This is literally a life and death issue for the long-term survival of this community. And I don't say that lightly, Nick.
No, Donna, I'll give you a minute. Do a wrap. What would you say? I mean, Lou said that pretty
I would
eloquently.
say
You know?
children, your children and grandchildren need safe, usable water supply, and the only way they're going to keep it and get it is if people start to speak up about this. So
I guess
parents, grandparents, please come out to the public hearing.
I guess what we're finding also is that we can't trust the people who we're supposed to trust to
Right.
protect us.
Right.
We have agencies, we have a representative form of government, we elect people, we have officials who are supposedly there for our best interest. And we're finding that perhaps from what you're saying tonight, that they're not actually doing that job.
Correct.
They're not doing
Correct.
the job that they've been elected to or appointed to do. So,
That is correct.
Guys, I want to thank you for being on the show tonight. It was a great show. Folks, you've been watching the ACE report here. Just before we leave, I don't want to make this too intellectual. I just was thinking about this. Most of us have learned about a thing called the principle or the law of conservation of matter and energy, which means that matter cannot be created or destroyed by ordinary means. But that's not to say that it can't be polluted by stupid human being choices that we make at many times. Our water source is finite. It's a finite resource. And if we pollute it, it's not going to be there for us. It's not going to be there for our families. It's not going to be there for our future in any way. You know, you've heard that expression about drinking the Kool-Aid. Don't worry about drinking the Kool-Aid. Be more careful about drinking the possibility of drinking radiation in your water. I want to thank you for tuning in tonight. Come back and be with us again the next time right here on the ACE Report. This is Nick Lawrence, and we'll see you the very next time.